All right. See if we've gone to live here. Here we go. Good evening and welcome to 2022. This is our first United Parent Council gifted program with the gifted department for PV schools. We're very excited to have a psychologist rejoin us this evening that's been here before. We'll introduce her in just a moment. But I am the gifted chair for United Parent Council. I'm Melissa Schwartz, and I seem to be getting an echo here. I don't know if you're hearing that, so I'll try to figure that one out. Take that down. So let me start by introducing Dr. Dina Reyes, the director of our gifted programs in PV schools.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for yet another really interesting topic that we have to share with you tonight from our local expert, Dr. Laura Wingers. Especially during COVID, we've had the opportunity to bring in speakers from all over the country, and we continue to get requests for our local expert, Laura Wingers. So Laura and I have been collaborating for more than a decade, and she's familiar with a lot of our families in Paradise Valley. So I'm very excited to have her return. Always a pleasure. And just keep an eye out on the gifted news and notes that the gifted parent newsletters and messages from your teachers. We're going to have another speaker up in February speaking specifically to parents on creativity. He is a internationally known expert on creativity, and he's a professor at ASU it teaches on that topic in our gifted department. So we're super excited to have him with us as well. Please take a look for it in the latest parent newsletter. It came out, so mark it on your calendars and be sure to register. Now, Melissa will introduce Dr. Wingers to you.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to introduce Dr. Wingers. She's been here before. She's helped us get through COVID. And as Dr. Reyes says, she is local. She is here and thankfully helping our students both with testing and also some of our students on day-to-day functioning. We're thrilled to have her back here addressing anxiety and ADHD in gifted learners. Welcome, Dr. Wingers. Just a real quick point of housekeeping. We do have everyone muted. We will have a Q&A a little bit later. And if you would like to ask questions, just put them into the chat to me, and I will ask them at the end so we can get those questions answered for you. We do ask that you have your videos off so that people watching this are only watching the presenter. I'm going to disappear myself here in just a minute. Elizabeth, did you have anything you wanted to say? Because I know you got muted here again, so let me unmute you.
All right. I just wanted to say, please go ahead and put anything in the chat that we can address. I will put the link to Gifted in Paradise, the newsletter, the latest one, in the chat here in just a few minutes. But thank you again for joining us tonight.
And as Elizabeth said, watch the chat screen if you can. You do not need to copy down the slides that will be on the presentation because I will be posting those in the chat. So if you have maybe a Word file or even an email to yourself, you'll be able to copy them right out of the chat and put them into a safe place on your computer so you don't have to handwrite any of these web addresses, trying to make it as easy as possible for you. And again, this presentation will be recorded. We are live streaming on our Facebook, and we will add it to our YouTube channel, and I'll post that in here as well. If you have not seen some of the other presentations, please come back and look at some of Dr. Wingers' other presentations. They are amazing. So with that, Laura, Dr. Wingers, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dina and Elizabeth. Glad to partner with such a great program for sure. So welcome to those of you who are joining us, whether you're live or looking at this later. And thank you for being a part of this discussion today. It has been a day, so I hope that you can grab a bite or grab something to drink and settle in somewhere comfortable, and just get ready for some, I hope, great new information. You have a lot of choices about how to spend your time, and I really appreciate that you're here and choosing to spend your time on this opportunity to get some information that I really believe will help your child and hopefully yourself as well. I work with a lot of kids, a lot of children and adolescents with anxiety. I work with a lot of children and adolescents with ADHD or executive function challenges, those with other learning differences like dyslexia. I work a lot with gifted kids of varying levels and dealing with the emotional and behavioral intensity that a lot of those children might experience. And we are all in this moment, right, working with lots of kids who have been impacted deeply by the situation we find ourselves in as it relates to COVID stressors and those circumstances. So, as I think about all of that, we know that there's been an uptick in mental health concerns. So tonight, I really hope that you'll get some great information as it relates to, how can we, let me just get this here, boost protective factors for kids. What can we do to understand how integrative approaches promote well-being and reduce distress? We'll talk about how to reduce risk factors, and we'll talk about how to make a plan for yourself and for your student. So again, looking back, we face challenges we have never faced before, right? So I don't need to go over this with you, but we've had this rapid, dramatic change that's lasted a long time. There's this sense of it being unpredictable and uncontrollable. We have all these continued changes and transitions and back to school. There's been a greater recognition of systemic issues and the challenges related to that. So there have been tremendously growing concerns about children's mental health. This is from the CDC data, and more than half of parents have been concerned about their children's mental health. Probably you're experiencing this to some degree. Certainly we know it's statistically, but we also know it anecdotally, and maybe you're seeing it, you're hearing about it, or you're experiencing it in your household as well. So among that, we see anxiety disorders, and anxiety disorders are the most common disorders of childhood and adolescence. They affect at least 30% of young people at some point before the age of 18. Good news is they're among the easiest to treat. But we also know that anxiety is sometimes a masquerader, right? Because the symptoms are often attributed to other issues. So there's a lot of ways that children's anxiety might show up as something else. And as you look at this slide, I'm sure you can relate to some of these. Maybe you're seeing this at home, that anger, that difficulty sleeping. Maybe there's increased defiance. Maybe there's lack of focus or avoidance. Maybe you've got a kid who's just flying off the handle suddenly for no reason. Or maybe you've got that one who's really trying to over control the situation. So lots of ways that we have to look at that behavior. We also have to recognize that, childhood depression occurs. It's very real. And kids can be resistant to both recognizing and talking about that. It looks different in children than it does in adults. Often depression and anxiety manifest as things that are more likely to be disruptive or oppositional or defiant, right? But you can be proactive. There are lots of options for that, and it doesn't mean weakness. And of course, we can't forget that there's also, 1 in 5 children in the US who have learning or attention challenges, things like ADHD or dyslexia or other kinds of learning differences. Some great information on this from the website understood.org. If you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend that you check that out. Lots of things. There's a resource there called Through a Child's Eyes that I think is such a powerful reminder of what it can be like for a child who's experiencing these kinds of issues, right? So, as we go through all of this, whether you have a child who is a preschooler or a high schooler, I really hope that you find something tonight that you can take away from this, that you can apply and use in your family immediately. So as we look at this mental health issue that's pervasive in so many areas, and as we think about this as it relates to gifted children in particular, we know it's complex. right? And I'm sure you've probably attended or heard more about information as it relates to misdiagnosis of gifted children, or perhaps a dual diagnosis for them. But I'm really, in this particular time that we're experiencing, I'm really trying to get away from this idea of diagnosis and dysfunction and what's wrong, and really look at a more integrative approach, finding out what is going right, what supports well-being, what can we do to help and support not just one child, but all children and each other, right? So whether you're dealing with something like this or not, this integrative approach, I think, is really critical. And that's where the Wellbeing Project really comes in. The Wellbeing Project is something we created here at Center, where we're really trying to look at, how do we create the conditions in our own lives and in the lives of our children, our family, that allows us to be healthier, happier, walk toward the things that we value most. We feel like that doesn't get talked about enough. There's a lot of focus on dysfunction and disorder, and really not a lot on the conditions that promote health and that promote well-being. So as I see it, I'm an expert in this area of conventional medicine. I've gone, through many, many years of school to have a doctorate in psychology and be able to offer solutions based on conventional medicine. But as I work with children and families, I really see the intersection with complementary approaches as well. And we'll talk more about that tonight, as well as lifestyle factors and self-care and how that all comes into being for children. Really powerful. And again, why an integrative approach? Well, because it's all connected, right? It's all connected. Mind and body are completely intertwined. And I think we know that, but do we really know that? We ever really thought about what that means? Some examples, we can have the same exact findings on X-ray in two different people, and yet a completely different symptom profile, completely different physical experience of that, right? That's mind and body connected. There's so much that our thoughts have to do with impacting our physiological response. Let's take a minute, think about this. This is something I might do with a child as well. I want you to, wherever you are, just kind of get settled in a second. And I'd like you to picture that you have a lemon in front of you. And you're looking at this lemon, maybe you're picking it up and you can see what it looks like, how it feels. Cut that lemon in half. So again, you're doing this in your mind, cut this lemon in half. Look at the juiciness, look at the skin, and imagine squeezing that, seeing that juice. Imagine bringing it to your nose, inhaling that scent. Imagine taking a bite. Are you salivating? My guess is you are. And why is that? You don't have an actual lemon in your hand, do you? But your thoughts triggered this physiological response. Think about all those kids out there with stomach aches and these general aches and pains that we can't really find a medical cause for. Very often there's this connection between mind and body that's triggering that, right? Another way to think about this, where do you think serotonin is located in your body? Serotonin, neurotransmitter, we think of it as a feel-good chemical in some ways. It's implicated in depression and anxiety, right? Where is that? Most people will say the brain. It's a neurotransmitter. It's in the brain. Well, guess what? Research is showing us that a significant portion of the serotonin is located in the digestive system. It's located in the gut. And so there's this new research that is really becoming, raising greater awareness of this mind-body connection when we look at the microbiome and the impact, mood and behavior, the impact on neurodevelopmental issues like ADHD or other executive function challenges, anxiety. So it's an exciting area to be, and we really do want to think about that integrative approach. So it starts for me with where are you today? This is your very first action step. And again, I hope you're doing whatever works for you to bookmark this, to take some notes, to write a list, something, but I want you to think about where you are today. And I'd like you to talk about this integrative approach. I use this wheel of wellness all the time with children and with adults. It actually stems from research from the Veterans Administration. There's a whole health, personal health inventory. Link is here. I think Melissa's going to drop that in the chat as well. Really great resource. It's also available in Spanish. It's available as a brief version, and you can use this as an adult for any purpose, but I think there's also ways to scale this for children too. To address mental health, we really need to look at whole health, don't we? There's somebody needing to be admitted. So let's take this in turn. Movement and energy. A lot of people who engage in workshops with us when we're going through this kind of whole health inventory, they'll have two columns, and one is a column for themselves and one is a column for their child or maybe somebody else in their family. So, when are you moving your body? What is your child doing to move their body? We know movement helps our brain pay attention, think more creatively. It helps reduce stress. So thinking about, where are we at with regard to that piece? Are you getting movement breaks in school, at home, during homework time? What else do you need to do? How about your physical environment? What does it look like in your home in the morning? What is it like after school? Are people scrambling in the morning? Is there a lot of argument, stress about homework or chores, about getting out of the door on time? What can we do to tweak our surroundings morning and evening? What can we do there? Especially with kids with ADHD, this can be really a critical thing. They need routines, they need structure, consistency, they need predictability. We want to reduce the nagging and the arguing and really improve the follow through. So recognizing where are they at? What can they do independently or not? And do I need to build more time in our day to avoid this stressful situation in our physical environment? Another tip, get rid of the TV in the morning, to have background music on. What are some ways we can change our environment? As we wind down for sleep at night, can we lower the lights? Is there other simple things that we can tweak in our environment? Another thing I think about is cultivating healthy relationships. Are you taking good care of the relationships in your life, in your personal life? How about at school? How about at work? As I was talking with teachers earlier today, we were joking about the fact that we can barely remember what day of the week it is. And I think if you're experiencing that on some level, know that that's normal. When we're under stress, when we have a lot of demands on us, we develop this sort of tunnel vision. And so a lot of things can kind of fall by the wayside. So I talk about offloading, working memory, but I also think that when we think of it with regard to this personal health inventory, don't beat yourself up if you're not optimal levels in all of these areas. Try to give yourself a scale of 1 to 5 with these, 1 being pretty terrible and needs a lot of work, and 1 being, pretty optimal and pretty happy with where I'm at. Most of us are somewhere in the middle on those. It's a matter of what your priorities are and what you have available to you. So, again, as I think about an integrative approach to working with gifted learners, an integrative approach to managing anxiety or ADHD, I'm thinking about cultivating healthy relationships. What are you doing to cultivate those relationships in your life? And for those of you who might be thinking, well, gosh, I can't do this with little kids. It can be done. All right. It can be done. So this is one example of something that I use all the time when I'm working with kids, is especially little ones. I'm just getting a sense of, how am I doing? How are things going in my family? How are things going at school? Overall, how is everything going? And you'd be surprised by just putting a mark on next to a smiley face or a frowny face, how much information that we can get about their perception of where they're at. Right? So you can modify this whole health inventory to address these areas for kids, and you'd be surprised at what they come up with. Often the things we think are a need for them, that it may not be their perception at all. And if that's the case, why? Are we overthinking it? Are we over worrying about it? Do they not have awareness? Is there some middle ground here? But, you do want to understand where they're at and what their perspective is on all of this. The other thing, I guess, before I come back to this, I want to say one more thing about this. Be intentional about talking about mental health at any age. I live and breathe this. This is what I do all day, right? So I'm very comfortable talking about mental health. And I know a lot of people aren't, but you want to really create, just like many other subjects, create a lot of opportunities for a two-way dialogue. Kids are going to encounter a lot of challenges over time, over the years. So this is not a one and done kind of conversation. This is an ongoing dialogue. Make it clear that mental health is an important topic. It's equally important. We talk all the time about our physical health, but we don't often talk about our mental health, and we need to do more of that. And you need to let your child know that you are comfortable talking about it, or at least approaching it. That doesn't mean you have to know all the answers, and it's okay being uncertain or unsure. Listen more than you speak. Often when a kid opens up to you, it's really easy to want to jump into problem solving mode. Let me help you. Let me solve this. Let me fix this. But let them express their thoughts, their ideas and opinions, their experiences. If they feel they're genuinely being heard, they'll be more comfortable opening up to you in the future. Don't immediately jump into that problem solving mode. Other simple things as it relates to mental health. A super great protective factor for mental health, eating dinner together as a family. If possible, 5 nights a week. I know that's not possible for a lot of reasons in a lot of families, but research has shown that regular family dinners without electronic distractions can improve mental health, can improve behavioral health. So if those family meals aren't possible, set aside other times for that quality time together where you're actively listening and engaging with each other. Answer kids' questions honestly, as much as you can and at an age-appropriate level. It goes a long way. For more on this kind of thing as it relates to kind of the ages and stages and mental health, physical health stuff, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some really great resources. healthychildren.org. And I think Melissa can drop that in the chat. Healthychildren.org is a really good resource for that. Moving on to other areas of that personal health inventory. Food is fuel. So whether you've got a child with gifted intellect, it's developing typically, or maybe they're experiencing anxiety, ADHD, what are you doing to fuel? Are meals afterthoughts? I don't know about you, but a lot of times I can get into that mode where I'm just sort of reactive. What are we going to eat right now? So that piece, what are you doing? Are you fueling your body well? If you eat out a lot, maybe you eat out 4 nights a week, can you break that down to 3? Are you helping your kids choose nutritious snacks? Those kinds of things can make a big difference in children's mood and behavior. And I know you know all this, but I think we have to remind ourselves sometimes, how many hours of sleep are you getting a night? How many does your child get? Do you have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep? What's the quality of the sleep in the evening? Keep screens out of the bedroom, if at all possible. Do not doom scroll social media accounts at night. That's not doing nobody any good. I don't know about you, but I'm finding social media to be very anxiety provoking or stressful for me. I don't feel good after I look at that. So being mindful about what are you doing to kind of fill your brain in the evening when you're winding down and getting ready for bed. How you tell your body it's time to wind down. Do you have that routine and ritual with your child? I'm finding lots of kids are having difficulty falling asleep or having greater worries and concerns. So knowing that we may need to be more patient. We may need to take more time in some of these areas. And then this other piece that I think you can also really have a big impact on, relaxing and healing. How do you start the day? What is it like in your family at the end of the day? And also, what are we doing to teach and train attention and develop greater flexibility to reduce reactivity, right? These are such critical skills. There's some really good resources out there for this. I'm going to talk about some of these in just a moment, but you may be familiar with apps like Calm or Headspace or Insight Timer. But you don't need an app, you don't need a video, you don't need a script. Sometimes it's just as simple as checking in with yourself, checking in with your child. What are you doing right now? Where's your mind right now? What are you focused on? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused somewhere else? How happy or unhappy are you right now in this moment? There's an estimate that we spend about, I think, 47% of the time not aware of what we're doing or what we're thinking. Imagine if we could change that. 47% of the time, we're not even aware of what we're doing. We're just on autopilot. If we could shift that, even 1%, even 5%, what would be the change in our productivity, in our engagement with life, in our happiness, right? So things to really be thinking about. As we're sitting here, where do we go from here? We didn't all start in the same place, and our unique circumstances impact our ability to cope. So we'll talk about some ways to really boost protective factors, to create connection, to reduce reactivity and reduce our risk factors, and how to get more support if you need it. So let's dive into that. Boosting protective factors, creating connection, huge. The two main ingredients for healthy children come down to this. They really do. A sense of routine and predictability, and safe, stable, nurturing relationships. This has been shown in the research over and over in early childhood. A great resource on this is Harvard University Center for the Developing Child. Again, Melissa can drop a link in the chat. Some really good resources there about how do we facilitate these healthy emotional and physical development in young children. And it does come down to something as simple as this. It's also connectedness. Connectedness is the fluoride in the water for mental health. If you think about what fluoride did, putting fluoride in the water, what that did as a public health thing many years ago, connectedness is that protective factor for mental health. So how do we get that? Well, school connectedness is a big part of it, isn't it? Creating an opportunity, creating an environment where students feel cared for, feel they belong, feel that we want them to succeed, and they can feel safe discussing their stressors, discussing what's going on with them. How do we do that? Well, there's tons of resources and support in the schools. There's also things like student-led clubs or mentoring programs, volunteering programs. Just setting rules and expectations and those routines is a way that kids get connected and stay connected. And it's a hugely important factor for mental health, right? So it's not just about the academic performance. I think a lot of times with gifted kids, we think, well, we need that challenge, that academic challenge, the rigor, the acceleration. But to get there, to have those great outcomes that we expect and we know can be achieved, we really need to focus on mental health too. And it comes from setting that relationship in place in the school. Also the shelter of each other. This concept comes from a great book by Mary Pfeiffer called The Shelter of Each Other. And again, Melissa can drop that in. But she talks about what are some of the things that protect families against the storms of life as we know it right now, and just the other kinds of challenges that we experience. And it's as simple as this. It's the traditions you share. Take a moment, write down what some of those traditions are in your family. They can be the big formal traditions, and they can be the silly little ones. What are the rituals? What are the ways you connect through ritual in your family? What stories do you share? What do you recall and about one another or about other family members or funny experiences you've had? That is a protective factor. Celebration. I don't think we do enough celebrating. And I think we could all use more of that right now. But what are we doing there, and how can we create more opportunities to celebrate small milestones and larger ones too? And simply time, right? The time is a big part of the shelter of each other and creating connectedness. Another way we promote protective factors, getting those healthy lifestyle habits going. And again, we're not going to beat each other up or ourselves up about this, what we're doing or not doing, but trying to be intentional, trying to think about encouraging these foundational healthy habits, looking at sleep, looking at nutrition, finding a healthy balance, looking at movement and creative ways to gain movement, and looking at screen time and the limits. Boy, that is something that comes up a lot for me. I'm sure it's a challenge in your families too, to find, what is the right balance. And so one of the things I talk about is, trying to detox somewhat, trying to set those limits, being very firm about that, but also engaging it with the child in terms of making a plan. Big screens, as a rule, are better than small screens. What kind of content are they looking at? Are they co-viewing content with you? Or are they, behind closed doors? All of those have to do with the risk or protective benefits of screen time. A digital detox can be really helpful sometimes. Another piece of it, again, we are what we eat. So think about, visualize your grocery cart. What does your grocery cart look like? And is there room for 1% change there? We talk a lot about this here in our well-being project, because food is fuel, and we're learning so much more about the microbiome and inflammatory factors. So can you eat more plants? Can you look at foods that have 5 ingredients or less? Again, the fewer ingredients, the better. And what are the colors and what kind of containers does your food come in? Can be a really good, simple rule of thumb for what we're putting into our bodies. Part of this is that an out of balance gut health does cause problems really for everyone. But we do seem to be seeing some research that indicates that folks with ADHD already seem to have an immune system sometimes that isn't really well regulated. And so we sometimes see more allergies or some low grade inflammation that can be driving symptoms. Again, that's emerging research, not proven, but I do think that plays an important role, and we need to be more thoughtful and intentional about what we're putting in our bodies. We also have to think about hydration. My goodness, I can make a huge difference in a child's mood and behavior sometimes with just taking a pause to get a glass of water, right? So what are you drinking? More water, drinking fewer juices, avoiding, in your case, alcohol or sugary beverages, kind of trying to dial some of that down. Read labels. Even the things that are marketed as healthy drinks or foods for us often have some sneaky ingredients that really can throw us off. Being more active. And again, lots of good resources out there about what and how we can do that. Even during this time, getting outside. Try to think back to a time in your life when you felt really in sync with your child. So we felt attuned and connected, and things just kind of felt easy. I'm sure each of you can access a memory like that. It might be just a moment, or maybe it's a longer period of time, but I'm sure it's something that you treasure. I know I do. So when you were in that state, you were just present. You were connected without effort, without demand. How do we get more of that in our lives? Right? Another action step. When we talk about boosting these protective factors, when we talk about introducing integrative approaches for our children, I never want this to be done to the child. I want it to be done with them. So this framework is something I use all the time. It's a really useful way to talk to kids about the concept of anxiety, about the concept of ADHD, or really any challenge or any diagnosis you might be working on. And it's a sentence frame that has 5 pieces. The first piece, we identify your strengths. The second piece, we name the challenges, the things that are difficult. We define the diagnosis, if there is one. Maybe there isn't, but we define what the challenge is. We're going to give it a name of some kind. Fourth piece, this is huge. Guess what? You're not alone. This is really typical. It's common. Uncle Joe, Aunt Betty, Grandma so-and-so has a similar way of being. Your mom, your dad do. So let's make a plan, right? Let's make a plan. So identifying strengths, naming the challenges, defining what it is, what we're going to call it, reminding them they're not alone, and that we're going to make a plan. So I use this all the time. Sometimes, for example, if we're introducing the idea of doing therapy, we might say, well, you're going to work with a therapist who can help you learn some ways to help your brain make a plan when you're feeling really overwhelmed. Or maybe we'll talk about mindfulness. Well, mindfulness can help you, learn some different ways to notice your thoughts instead of getting stuck in them. Another thing we'll talk about once we've learned some approaches is to say, hey, when things are hard in the moment, remember you can use that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 strategy, or the 4, 7, 8 breath, or other techniques we've learned to ground yourself, to figure out what to do next. We might say, hey, this is a way that I can check in with you when you're having a hard time. Or a way to check in with you when there are changes in the schedule or things that are unexpected or surprising for you. Even, again, recognizing their strengths. Well, hey, I think we really want to support somebody else. And I think you'd be a great addition to a group as somebody who really understands a lot about the brain and about feelings and maybe can help others. Right? So use that, please use that and engage your child in a conversation. And again, you can do this at any age, whether you've got a preschooler or a high schooler, there's ways to use this. Hope that's helpful. Another way we boost protective factors, we can explore mind-body practices. Again, those of you who know me know that I've spoken on this topic before. I'm not going to get into great detail here tonight. There are some other resources available both from me directly and through the UPC archives. But a growing body of research indicates that mindful practices can really reduce that emotional overreactivity that we get even to the normal ups and downs of life, and relieve feelings of sadness and anxiety, make them more manageable. Mindful practices can allow for greater mental flexibility. They can train our attention and awareness, increase our ability to delay gratification, improve our perspective taking skills. And gosh, we all need that, don't we? And our kids do too. So, it might be things like this. It might be yoga, or maybe it is mindfulness, or even biofeedback, guided imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, even massage. So there's many, many ways to find these mind-body approaches. And do you see how they're not aimed at dysfunction or disorder or fixing something? They're aimed at promoting well-being. They're aimed at really helping support greater emotional regulation and better coping skills. So lots of ways to meet that. There's great resources for this online, on YouTube. There's some really good websites and books and local programs. But I want to remind you, this isn't just a feel-good thing. Again, the research supports that mindfulness literally can change the brain. We find improvements in anxiety, improvements in cognitive functioning, better self-regulation, changes in the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, when we really engage intentionally with mindful practices over time. If you want to learn more about that, this website, mindfulschools.org, a really great resource. There's the research. You can see some of the research there. You can find sample lessons, some great videos, other sort of ways to kind of start a conversation and learn more, whether that's at school or at home. And it's not something to be intimidated by. Start small, right? 1% better, moving from just one mindful minute over time. Think of the cumulative impact of that. Think about what that looks like over time, because what we practice grows stronger. And so if we are truly intentional in improving focus and self-control, if we're intentional in talking about in strengthening our attention and awareness or our perspective taking. It does truly grow stronger. How often do we prompt our kids to pay attention or focus, to be thoughtful? And yet every one of us has had that same experience of not being so attentive or being on autopilot. How often have you maybe driven to work or driven somewhere you go often and had no conscious recollection of your commute? Or how you've absentmindedly responded to your partner or to your child, and while you're thinking about something else, you've lacked focus, you've lacked intention and self-control on occasion too. So we know that, in our case as adults, we have all these years of experience to draw on, the repeated practice, the intentional practice over time that puts those kinds of situations in perspective. What we've practiced has grown stronger, but our children have less experience to draw on, right? Less practice, less intentionality. If you think about the development of these skills as you would maybe about their physical development, right? Think about a 2-year-old's legs. They're not yet their adult size or strength, but they still help that child run and walk, right? The same is true for executive functions. The same is true for emotional regulation. These are skills that are still developing. And if we want them to get stronger, we have to be more intentional in what we practice to develop that. More mindful practices here. Again, Melissa, I think, can drop this all in the chat for you, but I wanted to give you those resources right away. If you're interested, we're going to be offering some courses here at Center, so feel free to shoot us an email too if you might be interested in getting that. But know that there are so many resources available, even in your schools, as well as online. With a mindful practice, a simple mindful minute is often about just beginning with attention to the external environment. Over time, we move to the experience of the body, and it's really only later, and we're not doing this with little ones, but only later that we're really beginning to introduce the idea of attention to the mind, recognizing thoughts and moving forward. I could spend hours just on this topic. I wish I could do more justice to it tonight, but I want to at least give you that sense. Again, one of these many ways we can boost the protective factors for kids. Another one that I think is so important, and man, it's made a huge change in my life, is gratitude. Intentionally practicing gratitude. The 3 Good Things app on Android or Apple, something you can get. It'll prompt you every day to think about 3 good things. Maybe you have these kinds of conversations at your dinner table or with your child in the evening. What are some good things that happened? And how did it make you feel? Sometimes you got to dig pretty deep. I know I've had to sometimes dig pretty deep to find those 3 good things, but that practice over time genuinely does grow gratitude and genuinely does improve, a more optimistic, positive outcome. This book by Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology in our field, The Optimistic Child, another great resource for, how do we promote that? Some kids are more, I'm sure you've seen it too. Some kids are more naturally optimistic or more naturally pessimistic. Same is true for us as adults. So there's some temperament things that kind of come into play. But again, regardless of where we started, intentional practice over time can really, change the trajectory for kids. I guess another final thing on this idea of protective factors is sometimes we just have to embrace uncertainty. And that's a hard one for a lot of our gifted kids who like to be perfectionistic and have control and know what's happening. But, some of the most beautiful chapters in our lives won't have titles until a lot later. So, start where you are, accept and acknowledge your own anxiety, figure out where you are today, engage your self-care plan, welcome your kids' questions, whatever the question, try to take it seriously. Set the tone, be reassuring, be okay not knowing the answer, not having all the answers and saying, I don't know, but keep talking, keep those kids, coming back for that dialogue and letting them know that you'll keep them updated too as you learn more. I think that's a really powerful lesson, especially at this time where there's a lot of things that aren't under our full control. Because when you can accept kind of where you're at, you really prevent that pain from turning into suffering. You can stop the burnout, prevent the exhaustion, just accept where you are as much as you can, even if it's a pretty bad place, and be present. Choose a valued direction and take some kind of action. Tremendously powerful protective factor. But let's also talk before we wrap up about some risk factors. And one of the first things I think we really needed to discuss is, do you need to take action right now? One of the ways I look at that with families is using this decision tree. Is the problem, whatever you define as the problem, is it feeling like an emergency? If not, well, maybe you can consider these integrative approaches and make some of these lifestyle changes, and then get some professional help if you run up against the limits of that approach, right? But if the answer is yes, the problem is feeling like an emergency, well, then you probably need some professional support. And you want to do that and then add those lifestyle changes as you go. If the answer is yeah, but really mainly at home, not so much at school, well, maybe you start with some behavioral counseling and you do these lifestyle changes and you work on that together as a family. But if the answer is also yes, and everywhere, like it's all the time and it's incredibly stressful, then you might need to consider something like medication or other types of more in-depth, more intensive support. And then you can kind of back off from those approaches as some of these other supports come online. So I hope that's a helpful way to think about this decision tree, thinking about, what might be relevant in your particular situation. And what about you? How are you doing? Are you experiencing some burnout? Do you feel like you have compassion fatigue? For those of you not familiar with this concept, it's that emotional exhaustion, that just the fatigue that comes from just I care too much for too long. And so you sort of depersonalize, you get depleted of your empathy or caring. You don't feel as compassionate. Maybe you feel a sense of futility, like nothing you do is going to make any difference anyway. Those aren't normal ways to feel. Those are a sign that you're burning out or you're getting some compassion fatigue. Other symptoms you might experience: your job feels increasingly stressful. You're more irritable or angry or frustrated. You're physically, emotionally exhausted. You have trouble concentrating, and maybe you're getting increasingly cynical. If that's happening to you, again, recognize it for what it is and show yourself some compassion. Don't beat yourself up that you're not doing a better job or you don't have it under better control. It's where you are. And if you can be kind and curious and compassionate with yourself, you're going to be more likely to take action that's going to move you out of that and into a healthier way of being. We talk about completing the stress cycle. Often we're so in this constant low grade stress around from this stressor to this stressor, to this stressor. We don't often take time to intentionally complete the stress cycle. And this is information from Nagoski and Nagoski, if you're interested in their research. But it really is to say, hey, there's huge benefits from doing some of these very simple things to complete the stress cycle. What are you doing to move, to breathe? Are you getting social interaction that fills you up, finding ways to express and get affection, whether it's your pet or your child or other loved ones or other ways that fill you up? Maybe you need to cry. That can be an incredibly helpful release. Maybe you need to find some creative expression or other ways to complete that stress cycle. So thinking about that. There, one of the ways that the Nagoskis talk about it is they say there is a beginning, a middle, and an end of every emotion. And so very often we don't really see that. We don't see that through to completion. And our kids don't either. So we feel like we're constantly on to the next thing, but really recognizing, okay, this is where I'm at. I've kind of come through that and I'm ready for whatever might come next. Another piece of this, and I'll start to wrap it up here. I want to share with you, if you have a challenge, if you're trying to learn more about your gifted learner, Maybe you're trying to learn more about anxiety and why your child is behaving the way they are, more about ADHD and whether or not that's, an issue for your child, or how better to parent and support. Learn all you can. Here are some books that I love and recommend often, all the time. So Taking Charge of ADHD by Russell Barkley. He's written a more recent book, 2020 release date, 12 Principles for Raising a Child with ADHD. Super helpful for parents. Getting Ahead of ADHD is a book that really embraces this idea that I've been talking about, is really an integrative approach to managing. And then there's an old favorite. I mean, gosh, this has been around for a while. How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. A great resource for kids and parents of any age. Also, these books I recommend if we're looking at anxiety. There's some really useful resources here. You might be familiar with some of these. Some parents have told me they've had good success with using resources like gozen.com or Big Life Journal. I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of all of their resources, but what I have seen is really useful, and it's really presented in a child-friendly way. I don't know about you, but we're seeing mental health providers kind of taxed and having reduced availability in some ways. So there are ways to get that help from a professional, but I also want you to know that there are ways to get that help through just conversation and learning and practicing together. If you want a deeper dive on some of these resources, and again, Melissa can put that in the chat for you, some really good resources, some YouTube videos and so on. I love the website childmind.org. I urge you to sign up for their weekly newsletter. Understood.org, again, another resource I've mentioned before that I think is really useful. So hopefully, these are if you're interested in learning more, will be a place to start. Be sure you're addressing school factors. Get resources. Does your child need tutoring? Do they need other academic interventions? What supports do they have in place, and what might you need to ask for? How can teachers show sensitivity to kids who have this anxiety, performance anxiety or otherwise? What can we do to provide an environment where they feel less stressed? Where's their safe harbor at school? If there are school safety issues, kids need to know that adults will intervene if they feel unsafe or threatened. Make sure that it's a welcoming, engaging environment where students can feel connected with their school, with their teachers. And again, get involved through outreach, through after-school programs, stay connected with your teacher. Our schools are under tremendous stress right now. Our families are under tremendous stress right now. We need to connect and support each other. If you need help, what do? Identify your helpful people, right? So what are the help-seeking pathways? I talk about informal pathways and formal pathways. Informal is talking to your friends, talking to your family or extended family, talking to your spiritual leaders or community leaders. Maybe it's teachers or coaches or club leaders. For a lot of kids and adults too, it's social media. And again, that's a double-edged sword. But I do think that there are some good resources on social media about mental health and about how to get help. On Instagram, for example, there's an account I like called The Brain Coach. There's another called Peds Doc Talk. There's Big Little Feelings. You may be familiar with some of these, and maybe you have others. And if you do, feel free to drop them in the chat for other parents to take a look at. But recognize that you don't have to doom scroll into all the stressful content, that there's some really useful educational content you can get as well. Lots of our adolescents in particular are getting their content from Instagram or TikTok, or Snapchat, right? So we need to really help them understand, are you looking at it with them? Are you talking about the content they're seeing? Are you telling them about the algorithm that feeds them more of the same kind of content, and looking at kind of what's more balanced, what's healthy or unhealthy about what they're viewing, and how they can, change that algorithm if need be. So, I think those are sources to look at. We really want to reduce barriers. Not everybody can afford to get a, private evaluation or get into therapy or has the time or resources for that. So what are some of these other pathways to get help? At school, we have tons of great resources. You're lucky to be in a district that has a lot, with counselors, with social workers, with school psychologists. Talk to your pediatrician, talk to a psychologist in the community like myself or others, other mental health resources. There's so many ways to get that support. Who are your helpful people? And I think it is helpful to write that down. I think, again, when we talk about our stress and like what we can handle right now, it's sometimes hard to generate solutions. It's hard to generate ideas or to identify who you would talk to if you really need it. So that's part of what I hope you've done this evening, is to really be intentional and thoughtful about walking through an inventory of your personal health, thinking about ways that you are or can boost protective factors for your child or your family, what you can do to reduce or remove those risk factors, how you can create connectedness. And gosh, I think we all need that more than ever right now. Take committed action. Whatever you've gotten from this presentation tonight, I'm sure it has varied from person to person, but find something that you can really get behind and take committed action on. Think about it. What will you do? This is a framework I use a lot of times when I'm working with families one-on-one. What do we need to better understand our child and why they're experiencing what they're experiencing? Do we need to collaborate more with the pediatrician? Do we need to consider something like a psychiatric consultation? What can we do with regard to some of these complementary medicine approaches that have been well researched and are safe and appropriate? Do we need to request accommodations or interventions at school? Should we consider some tutoring or executive function coaching? Do we need more support for our parenting so we can apply these approaches? Are there ways we can be more intentional about how we teach emotional and behavioral regulation? How can I support my child's interests? Focus on the things that really matter for all of us and that we value. And then again, making that plan with your child, not having something be done to your child. Just 1% better every day makes a huge difference. Those small, simple actions over time add up to a big change. So keep that in mind. And again, remember, why this approach? It's because it truly is all connected. The simple act of you being present tonight is that small, simple change right now. But, think about what that means over time. We covered a lot. I hope you've gotten one or two things that are important to you. And again, I'm here if there's questions or if there's anything I can do to help. I really do believe that we can do hard things together. My contact information is here, website, our phone number. We do offer a variety of services for preventative care, assessment, consultation. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to stop my screen at this time and see if we have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. And we do have some questions. So
Okay.
let me go ahead and go to some of those from earlier. Other folks, if you want to post them in the chat. We did have some people ask a couple of questions earlier.
Great.
Do you have any tips on breaking the dysfunctional routines for a child with ADHD and anxiety?
Yeah. How to break those dysfunctional, what was it? Say it again.
Routines.
Yeah, the routines.
We all have dealt with a change in our patterns over the last 2 years with everything that's happened with being in school and out of school, and routines definitely have modified. So what about those dysfunctional routines? Is there a way to fix
I love that. Yeah, I love that question. I think it's such a great one. And yes, isn't it funny how, I often say we don't suddenly become the way we are. We are the result of our habits, and we are the result of those small shifts and changes over time. I don't know about you. I'm not a big New Year's resolution kind of person because I ultimately always fail. But I am a big one about setting goals and about having intention about what I'm going to pursue and what I want. So I think it comes back, and that question comes back to some of what we discussed earlier. Take stock, take an inventory with your child. And again, it's not you judging what's going on with them. It's them assessing, where am I at? Am I moving my body enough? What am I doing to take care of my how I feel myself? What kinds of activities am I involved in? How much time am I spending on screens? How am I doing at school? How are my friendships? And again, your perspective as the parent may differ from theirs, but I will guarantee you, they know that there's some things they want to change. And if they feel that they're not being judged, or it's not a punitive thing, they can be willing to take those actions too and make those shifts. Again, it depends on the child and the age. And so there's so many factors that kind of come into play there, but I would really probably pick one or two small things, not big ones, not we're going to go from, 20 hours of screen time to one, but I'm going to pick one small thing and I'm going to shift. I'm going to shift on that. And then I'm going to sort of track that over time. So that's the way that I really look at that. And again, dysfunctional, it's not serving us well. Right? So can we get to a point where we recognize whatever this is that we're doing, it's not really serving us very well. Let's think about what would.
Great. So small incremental changes.
Absolutely.
And participatory, that working with them. Okay.
Yes, right. 100%.
Do you have resources or suggestions on working with teachers who may not be as sympathetic regarding the behaviors that accompany ADHD and anxiety in the classroom?
Oh, yeah. That's a big one, isn't it? Yeah, I do. And one of the things that I do is help facilitate a conversation about those issues when I'm personally acquainted with a child or a family, so that I can help both them understand what the teacher can and can't do, and also help the teacher understand it from the child's perspective or from what the parents are experiencing at home. I think, one of my big things with working with teachers is to kind of try to come into it with they're doing the best they can with what they know. So what can I do to reach out and meet them halfway? What can I do to say, hey, I know you're working hard in this situation. I have a lot of respect and appreciation for you. Here are one or two small things that we've noticed at home that help our child. And I'm wondering if you might be able to do something like that in the classroom. I think that's the starting point. And I don't put it in an email. It's a conversation we have by phone or in person, right? So it's so hard. It's so easy to cross paths in a negative way, when we're just putting it in writing, but having that conversation and recognizing that. I do find that teachers want to help. And when they do understand it as legitimate, they're more than willing to bend over backward to find those supports.
Well, and I think it's especially challenging because it's different for those different grade levels and the age levels. You've mentioned this earlier, but all of these things appear differently at those different levels as a student is progressing. So something that's happening for a fourth grader is very different than a 10th grader.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, you want to be your child's advocate. That's your job. But you also want your child to become a self-advocate as well over time. Again, that doesn't start immediately, but over time, that's where we're headed to. So be careful how you talk about your child's teacher or about your school or about what's happening there. Trying to give the benefit of the doubt, not rush to judgment, thinking about the problem solving communication part of it, not just what somebody is or isn't doing.
Any tips for technology? I mean, again, the last 2 years we have transformed the amount of technology we've allowed our students to have, primarily because, so I've got older kids, right? Mm-hmm. This is the way they've interacted with their friends. I mean, it's on Discord, it's on, some text situation, or so they're not on Facebook, but they're on
Yeah.
certainly other things, Instagram, Snapchat, and trying to shut those down. I mean, that is just as much the phone that, we grew up with, that was hanging on the wall in the center of the house, and now they're in their rooms.
Yeah.
What are some, suggestions for how to possibly create some boundaries with that?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's such a big one. And I could talk for hours about that topic. And, I'm sure you've probably had presenters in the past who talked for hours about that topic. It's a big one. There are some really good resources from Common Sense Media. There's really great presentations from Not My Kid. You may have talked about that. I think there's one coming up soon that's called, oh gosh, what is it? Online and Unsupervised. And so I think, just like so many other things in life, I think about balance. I think about everything in moderation. And so if we're out of balance, that's when it's not serving us well. Right? So how do we, again, help them understand and appreciate that, like what's impacting them? And again, especially with teenagers, it can't just be you're not doing well in school and therefore I need to take away your phone, or kind of situation. That's going to lead to further arguments and further, power struggles. But really, they are digital natives. They are going to have this tool, this really powerful tool. And so we want to make sure that they recognize, I have to use this responsibly, have a contract, be careful about that. But, one of the things that I find powerful with teenagers is, again, how does it make you feel using your phone the way you do? I'm not asking you to do anything different. I'm just asking you to tell me, how does it make you feel? And if you feel like crap when you're texting with your friend at 1 o'clock in the morning, maybe don't do that. If you're in some pretty toxic chat rooms, maybe don't do that. And if you are in a situation where your child doesn't have the self-control to manage that, well, then you may need to step in and take greater control of that. Keep phones out of the bedroom, be more transparent about what they're viewing. But I think, one of the ways that we get teens, especially, to get there is to be curious about what they're viewing, to share the funny stuff and not overreact when they show us the icky stuff. Again, it's all about keeping that open communication and helping them recognize, how are they going to move forward in a healthy way with these tools.
And it does start with respect both ways. Now, you've said that many times tonight in terms of listening rather than demanding. So I greatly appreciate hearing that. And of course, that has to do with that mindfulness, right? Recognition and trying to watch your reactions, right?
Yeah. And boy, that's hard sometimes, isn't it? I mean, we all, there are certainly, all of us have times when we have reacted in less than ideal ways, so sometimes it's owning that too, and if you've had a difficult conversation or you've overreacted or reacted in a way that you wish you hadn't, it can be really powerful to own that later on, to come back and say, you know what, I don't like the way I handled that situation. I wish I'd done this instead. Something as simple as that, I think, can make a big difference.
And learning to breathe.
Yes.
As you've mentioned before, take that breath before responding.
Yeah. Right. So true.
Well, I don't see any other questions. I see Dr. Briez mentioning the upcoming presentation, which might be of interest to you as well, Dr. Wingers. It's on creativity, parenting with creativity by Ronald Baghetti, who is from here at ASU. So we will have that on February 15th, and I will drop that in as well. We'll see if the link will work. I got most of your other links to pop in there. A few of them did not hold their connection. So, and in folks, the tiny URL there, if you can copy and paste just that should be an actual hyperlink to register for that presentation. But it didn't show up as a hyperlink in that. So thank you again, Dr. Wingers. For those that have not realized it, she is here in the Scottsdale area with her practice, the center. So, or center psychology, excuse me. And so, and she is one of our testing psychologists that can do the testing for your student if they have not been tested for gifted and other things, certainly as well. So we greatly appreciate your joining us. I did put in the chat the link to the United Parent Council's YouTube channel, and Dr. Wingers has done several presentations. So please look for her and other presenters in that long list of videos we have up there. They are really amazing to go back and watch. So we hope that helps all of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. We do have the next United Parent Council presentation is actually about programs in our schools that our PTOs and PTAs are doing, and that is upcoming, and somehow I lost my link. So please go to PVUPC, the Facebook page, and you can see our upcoming UPC meeting. And as Dr. Briez said, we have February 15th is our next gifted presentation for parents.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. I hope it's been helpful, and I always appreciate collaborating with such a great program.
Thank you, Dr. Wingers. Thank you, Melissa, for everything.
And we look forward to you joining us again. We have been live on Facebook, and so you can go back there. That's automatic. We will load it to our YouTube channel, though, in the next probably 24, 48 hours. So, and I'm going to try to see if we can take your links and copy them so that they're available. I don't know if we can add them to our YouTube. We'll try. We can edit those videos a little bit. So thank you, everyone.
Good night. Good night, everyone.